President, please be seated. The court is now back in session. We shall hand over the floor to Khieu Samphan defense to continue putting questions to the expert. You may proceed.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Chandler, I would like us to return to what we were saying before the break. I would like you to comment on what I see as a contradiction. What I mean is this. On the one hand, you state that the status of members of or membership of the party was confidential and no dates for membership were provided. At the same time, you state that despite such confidentiality, such secrecy, Mr. Khieu Samphan is described with regard to the period before 1967 as someone who was a member of the party. My question to you is, what is your source for describing Mr. Khieu Samphan as such?
Thank you. Well, I hope there's no contradiction. Evidence for secret membership is not available, but my assertions that he may seem to me to have been a member at the time stem from his the trajectory of his life, the continuity of his loyalties, and so on. In fact, I could qualify my sentence by saying that it's possible that it was in the interest of the party not to induct Khieu Samphan into its membership in order to keep him as a front operator, friendly to them and friendly to their policies. This is reflected very faintly by the fact that he wasn't brought onto the Central Committee until 1971. So he's got to have been a member of the party at least since 1971, not never a member of the party, because you don't ask people off the street to get onto the Central Committee. But I think it's more likely that he, like all his colleagues from France who had joined the French Communist Party and who had worked closely together in various schools and so forth in Phnom Penh, that it seems very unlikely to me that he alone of all that group would not have been privy to the existence of the CPK and to the way that it was behaved. He may not have been going to secret meetings. There's no evidence that Khieu Samphan, for example, was at the Congress in 1960. I don't think that's ever been asserted. But that he would continue to be seeing a group of his friends from Paris, all members of the CPK, and still, for reasons that will elude me, refusing to join the party himself just seems very unthinkable to me. You go ahead and be communist. I can't be one for reasons that I can't explain, but I'm still friends with you. I teach at the same school and so forth.
Bon, enfin, je pense que nous pourrions en discuter sans fin parce que...
I think we can discuss this matter indefinitely because we are talking of assumptions here, and I don't want my learned friend of the prosecution to object to any attempt to further discuss this issue. So let me ask you another question, which is not very far off from this one. My question has to do with a meeting of the Central Committee. You told this chamber that the decision to evacuate Phnom Penh had been taken by a Central Committee meeting held in February 1975. You said on 19th of July 2012, page 56, at about 11:47, and you said as follows: I think it is public knowledge that this is found in several sources. My question to you, Mr. Chandler, is as follows. What is the tangible basis that you have for asserting that that decision to evacuate Phnom Penh was taken by a Central Committee or at a meeting of the Central Committee held in February 1975?
As I recall from that testimony, which you recall more sharply, of course, by being able to look at the transcript, and I'm not making, I'm seeing the transcript myself, no blame there, I have it right here. I think I was basing that assertion about the February meeting on the published work of Ben Kiernan, who was himself basing it on interviews that he'd had with people who had attended the meeting. Or had attended a meeting, a larger meeting following the Central Committee meeting. I'm sorry, not people on the Central Committee. Ben did not speak to people on the Central Committee himself. I think that's what that's what I remember. I may be wrong. I hope I'm correct there.
Je suis désolé, je marque un temps d'arrêt parce que c'est vrai que
I have paused because the French interpretation doesn't appear to have been very practical. And so I want to seek your clarifications. You talked about a more broad-based meeting. Can you please further explain what you meant when you talked about meetings? I didn't quite understand what you said regarding the Central Committee and broad-based meetings.
That was how the meeting where these decisions were announced, not the meeting at which these decisions were taken, was described. That's the best I can say. I've not done research into this particular meeting myself.
Est-ce que vous savez que d'autres auteurs que...
Are you aware that authors other than yourself, for instance, Mr. Short, did not voice the same opinion regarding the date on which that decision was taken?
Objection, Mr. President.
The President, the prosecution, yes, you may proceed. Mr. Witness, please hold.
Again, on the same basis as one of our earlier objections, these vague references to supposed opinions of other experts without reference to the specific source are unhelpful and will not elicit the best evidence for this chamber. If my friend wishes to put before the expert Mr. Philip Short's analysis of this problem, then we'll have no objection, provided that the document was put on the document interface in a timely manner. But we cannot accept counsel summarising other expert evidence and putting it to this expert.
Oui, Monsieur le Président, écoutez...
Yes, Mr. President, let us be serious. We are examining an expert, someone who is well versed with various theses as to how the facts were adduced, and he is trying to explain to the chamber that there may have been contrary theses coexisting with others that are of concern to us. I can give you the reference of Mr. Short's publication, but I will simplify the question and ask Mr. Chandler whether he is aware of this other theory. This would enable us to move forward without necessarily having to provide long references on issues that Mr. Chandler is perfectly aware of. It is document E3/9, and the references in French are as follows: 00639 458 in English is 003 61 99, and in Khmer it is 007 555 81. This is a reference to the passage in the book titled Pol Pot, Anatomy of a Nightmare. Quote, I'll read in English, since it is in English.
Of
President, Counsel, please repeat the Khmer EIN number, as your statement earlier was too quick.
Bien sûr.
Of course, the EIN for the Khmer document is 007 555 81.
Citation
And I quote,
of 1974, when the decision was taken to evacuate Phnom Penh. Monsieur Chandler,
Mr. Chandler, were you aware of the existence of another date? And there are many other dates, by the way. And what do you say to that?
Well, I can thank you. I can only say I've certainly read this book. I've certainly read that page. I read it maybe 6 years ago. I'm certainly aware that there are other theories around. I would like to be sure that I saw the references for that there about the 74 versus 75 decision that was taken. I'd need the footnotes, and I need to check the footnotes. And if I had this question in Australia, I could answer it more substantially. But yes, the point of your question is, am I aware that there's differences of opinion, and am I aware of Short's point of view? In general, yes, and today on this particular point, yes.
Still regarding the evacuation of Phnom Penh, according to what you know, and since you have referred to this in your testimony, regarding evacuations prior to 1975, had those evacuations caused losses as significant as those we witnessed during the evacuation of Phnom Penh? And if so, can you give a basis for your explanations? Were the evacuations that occurred before 1975 some kind of premonition regarding feasibility and whether the subsequent evacuations could have occurred on the basis of what had happened before 1975?
Okay, the first part of your question, there's no way they could have been as severe because the scale of the evacuations was far smaller. The towns of Udong and Krache were much smaller than Phnom Penh. I think there is ample interview material available for the way these people were treated. Whether it was already part of a wider policy is impossible for me to say, but it seems to me what I did say in the testimony about these pre-1975 evacuations was that it was traditionally not in the interest of an invading force to take a city, for example, and then withdraw, leaving the population to go about its own business. The population of Udong was taken away from Udong precisely to deprive, or I can't say precisely, but it looks as if to deprive the Lon Nol regime of this human resource. In Krache, I'm not sure of the details. I don't think we have evidence of quite as much suffering being caused as in the Udong evacuation, which was larger.
Donc, si je comprends bien votre...
So if I understood your answer correctly regarding Udong, or the Udong evacuation, that was one stage in a process to conquer power. Is that what you mean?
Yes, I mean, everything they did in the Civil War was a step toward gaining power. This was just one of them.
Dans votre biographie de Pol Pot,
in your biography of Pol Pot, and I will quote a passage. This is it is on page 60. The document is E3/17, and the ERN in English is 003 92 974, and in Khmer it is 008 217 24, and you write as follows: the Vietnamese in the early 60s had advised the Cambodians to pursue the fight solely on a political basis, a basis that, I quote, was suicidal, end of quote. Can you explain why pursuing the political struggle was suicidal?
No, pursuing the political struggle as such was not suicidal, but telling the Cambodian communists that they could not take up arms when they were being oppressed, as was happening in the 1960s, meant that they were giving them a recipe either to shut up or to get killed. And this was a kind of direction that I think there are documents that indicate the Khmer Rouge resented a lot. What they wanted, what the Vietnamese wanted in Cambodia at this stage, was that political struggle could continue against Sihanouk, but nothing could be done to hamper or to undermine the informal alliance that Sihanouk had reached with the Vietnamese. And this would be undermined exactly as it was in 1969, 70, when the Khmer Rouge took up arms against the Sihanouk regime before the coup. Was interpreted by Sihanouk as they're still acting under Vietnamese guidance, which was not necessarily not all true in these particular movements. But so this must be a betrayal by the Vietnamese of the policy that he developed with them. So it was certainly in Vietnamese interest not to have armed resistance to Sihanouk. It was a suicide because it did not give the communist movement any the option of defending itself against aggression.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur Chandler.
Thank you, Mr. Chandler. Mr. President, I have no further questions for the expert.
President, thank you, Counsel. The hearing of the testimony of Professor David Chandler has come to a conclusion. Professor David Chandler, on behalf of the bench of the trial chamber, I would like to thank you very much for spending your valuable time to testify as an expert in the proceedings before us during the last 6 days. Your testimony will surely be part of the contribution to ascertaining the truth. And we wish you all the very best and have a safe journey back home. You are excused. Court officer, in cooperation with the visual unit, please arrange for his return. You may speak, Mr. Expert.
Very briefly, Mr. President, thank you for those gracious remarks. I'd like to say that although it may not have seemed so to many, this has been a very intriguing and interesting experience for me, and I hope I've been helpful. I wanted to put on record, there's no however at all, my gratitude to the Chamber for inviting me, my gratitude to the supporting personnel of the Tribunal for being so helpful to me just in making arrangements for me. And finally, I'd like to express my gratitude to the lawyers for the defense, the prosecution, and the civil parties for working hard to ask interesting, penetrating, and I hope in terms of history, helpful questions for your deliberations. So in closing, I'd just like to express my great thanks to all the people who've been working with me in my 5.5 days, and although it may not seem like it, I have enjoyed it. Thank you. Or seemed like it at times, I'm sorry.
Since the time is also appropriate for the morning break, the court will now adjourn and will resume at 1:30 this afternoon. All parties and the public are informed that from 1:30 this afternoon, we will hear the testimony of the witness TCW 564, who is waiting downstairs. The Defense Counsel, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our client, Mr. Nguyen Chia, would like to follow this afternoon's proceedings from his holding cell as he is suffering from a lack of concentration, has a headache and pain in his back. So, with your permission, we have prepared the waiver, and Nguyen Chia would like to stay in the holding cell this afternoon. Thank you.
President, having heard the request by Nguyen Chia via his defense counsel to follow the proceedings through a remote means, that is by audio-visual means for the afternoon session, due to his backache and headache and his ability to concentration, and the defense counsel, you need to submit the letter of waiver of the accused to the chamber for his direct presence in the courtroom, and instead to follow it through a remote means in the holding cell downstairs. The chamber agrees to this request, which he made through his defense counsel, to follow the proceeding downstairs through audio-visual means for this afternoon session. The defense counsel, you are required to immediately deliver the letter of waiver to the chamber with a thumbprint or a signature of Noon Chea. The AV unit, you are instructed to link the proceeding to the holding cell downstairs for Noon Chea to follow it for this afternoon session. Security guards, you are instructed to take the two accused to the holding cell downstairs during the adjournment. And for this afternoon, you need to have Mr. Noon Chea in the holding cell downstairs to follow the proceeding remotely. The court is now adjourned.